Hi, and welcome to Mrs. PM Reads, where we are continuing in the Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. Sorry about the coughing fit in the last video. I hope I'm all better today. All right, in our last video, it's basically, we were in London in AD 61, and it was telling us how the Romans had gotten their act together and just destroyed the Britain army. London at that time was a Roman outpost, and that it would be rebuilt with fortifications and etc. Joseph of Arimathea was there, and he was walking through and remembering things, and he is going home, and because he had offered himself as a messenger. And it says here, Joseph knew with certainty that something of great importance was about to happen, but he didn't know if it was good or bad. So that's where we stopped. We are still in AD 61. This is Black Lake, Britannia, Beltane, sending the messenger. All good things, my dear Clea, sensible men must ask from the gods. And that's from, Plutarch in Isis and Osiris to Clea, priestess at Delphi. It was midnight when the Roman sentries finally departed the area, and it was safe to build the fire. The rest of the tribe stood at a distance, sheltered by the dark wood. Joseph, with the three other men who'd been chosen, stood beside the fire and watched in silence as Lavernius, his skin bronzed by the flame, mixed some lake water with the flour of 5 grains they'd brought and prepared the pancake, then wrapped it in damp leaves and cooked it in ashes. When the pancake was done, he unfolded it and burned one corner a bit. Then he broke it into 5 pieces, 4 cooked and 1 burned, and placed them in a bowl. He held the bowl before each man, and each pulled out 1 piece. Lavernius accepted the last. When Joseph opened his hand, he found he had not chosen the blackened fragment of pancake. He glanced at the others with a mixture of relief and discomfort as, one by one, each man looked up from his hand. Then the tall, handsome young man with the russet hair and beard, Lavernius's own son, Belinus, smiled broadly in the firelight. He held open his hand containing the blackened fragment and displayed it for all to see. His smile was so radiant that, for just that fleeting instant, he reminded Joseph of the master. Though Joseph hadn't meant to disturb the ceremony, no matter what might happen, he'd never expected Belinus to be the one. No, Joseph heard himself say aloud. Lavernius quietly put his hand on Joseph's arm, then threw his other arm around his son's shoulder and squeezed him, almost with a look of pride. Let it be me, Joseph protested quietly to Lavernius. Not your son. He's only 33, with his entire life ahead of him. I'm nearly 70 and a failure. Lavernius threw back his head and laughed aloud, which hardly seemed appropriate to Joseph under the circumstances. If that's the case, my friend, he told Joseph, then why do you volunteer? What possible good could you be even to us, much less to the gods? Belinus is the perfect specimen, strong, healthy, unblemished, and he knows how to be the perfect servant, to submit to God's will. Ask him if he isn't happy to serve as our messenger. Joseph was suddenly flooded with the memory of the master's last meal, when he'd washed the others' feet. He wondered why, Whenever he thought of anything profoundly moving, instead of feeling inspiration, he only wanted to cry. Belinus smiled almost beatifically at Joseph as he opened his mouth and happily popped in the blackened pancake. When he'd swallowed it, he came to Joseph and took him in his broad arms, rocking him gently, just as Lavernios had once done so many years ago. Joseph, Joseph, he said, I won't be dying, you know. I'm going to eternal life. You must be happy for me. When I see your Isus on the other side, I shall bring him your loving thoughts. Joseph put a hand over his eyes and sobbed, but Belinus only glanced at Lavernios with a bemused shrug. His expression said, all these years living among the Druids, and he still thinks like a pagan or a Roman. They motioned for the others to come out of the woods as Joseph tried to collect himself. One by one, the people of the Celtic tribes moved from the shadowy thickets, came before the fire to be blessed, then carried their treasures of gold or copper to the lakeside and committed them to the waters. When all the vessels, forks, even slave chains had vanished, they moved in a single file behind Lavernios, away from the fire, around the lake's edge, to the lowlands where the darkened peat bogs lay. Clouds whispered over the moon, sifting an eerie half-light across the surface of the land. At the edge of the expanse of bottomless peat bog, Belinus got down on his knees and held his hands aloft. The two younger men who'd volunteered for this role, along with Joseph and Lavernios, removed his robes and other garments. Lavernios waited until his son was completely naked, then handed him the band made of fox fur. Belinus slipped it onto his arm, then lowered his head and folded his hands behind his back to be tied with leather thongs. The men also slipped a leather noose around the young man's neck. Belinus, his head still bowed toward the bog, said softly, Mother, into thy hands I commend my spirit. That's interesting. Joseph felt these words cut like ice into his very soul. He watched, not breathing, as Lavernius reached for the soft leather sack and extracted a razor-sharp hunting axe. Holding it high above his head, he raised his eyes to the sky. Just then, the moon appeared from behind the clouds and flooded the landscape with light. The Celts stood in silence at the bog's edge. To Joseph, they resembled a forest of praying trees. Lavernius intoned in his deep voice, This is the death by fire. By the God's thunderbolt, we commend thee to Tyrannus. Tyrannus? Belinus did not flinch as the axe swept down behind him, swift and sure, though Joseph thought he heard him gasp once as the sharp metal blade. Oh, okay. Yes. So Belinus is dead. The two younger men moved forward swiftly and tightened the noose as Lavernius, with one hard yank, pulled the axe free. This is the oh my gosh, they're going to kill him more than once. This is the death by air. We commend thee to Isus. Okay, we're going to skip that part. Well, you can imagine what happened. Two men now joined by Joseph, lifted the limp but beautiful body of Belinus from the earth and held it face down over the waters. Blah. This is like, blah. Then Lavernios spoke the last words that would be spoken that night. This is the death by water. We commend thee to Tatus. Joseph watched, blah, 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 sorry. But Just before it vanished, Joseph thought only for an instant that he saw something move in the thick black waters. He thought he saw God with open arms receiving the body of Belenus, and God was smiling. Wow. Okay. So they killed him dead first, but they killed him 3 times, once for each god. Very strange. All right, let's see. We'll go a little bit into the next section since last one was so short. This is called Utopia. Whoever feels that he is the carrier of the best blood and has consciously used this blood to guide the nation will keep this leadership and will not renounce it. Its fatal image, ... will be like a holy order. It is our wish that this state shall endure for thousands of years. We are happy to know that the future belongs to us. Adolf Hitler at 6th Party Congress, the 1,000-year Reich speech. And then, I have felt it my duty to my fellow men to place on record these 4 warnings of the coming race. Edward Bulwer, Lord Lytton, in the coming race. Okay. Well, we must be back to regular time. It doesn't tell us that, but we're talking about Zoe. So, the Closerie des Lilas remains one of the loveliest restaurants in Paris, lavish with flowers at all seasons. It seemed an incredibly inappropriate setting for today's romp through Nazi Germany and Austria, caught in the viper-like embrace of my blue-eyed grandmother, Zoe. Heaps of white lilacs greeted us as we arrived. We had a table beside the terrace, where outdoor trellises were laden with dripping vines. Zoe told us that she'd ordered our meal in advance. So when the sommelier had brought the wine and she'd sipped and we'd been served, she returned to the topic we'd come to discuss, our family. As I mentioned earlier, she began, high in the Swiss Alps, 4 rivers rise near the San Bernardino Pass. There existed at that place a century ago a utopian community. My grandmother, Cleo, a woman of no fame, but of enormous importance to our story, lived there for a number of years with my grandfather, Aramis Ben, one of the community's principal founders. I suddenly heard that bell go off as I flashed on what Dacian Bassarides had said about utopians when we'd stood just together outside the doors of the Hofburg in Vienna, that the idealists who begin by wanting to improve civilization often wind up trying to create a better breed of human. A perfect world high atop a mountain, the return to a golden age, Zoe said. Everyone thought such things in the past, and many still do, even today. But as I also said, life is neither simple nor black and white. It may well be that my grandfather's desire for utopia was, at heart, the cause of all the unhappiness that followed. I don't recall what we had for lunch that afternoon, but I do recall every detail of Zoe's story. As the pieces fell into place, I began to see how one small family's role could actually be that hinge or axis Dacian had spoken of, around which things turn as animals do on a carousel, as the zodiac seems to revolve around that star at the tip of the small bear's tail. I listened with interest as Zoe began her story of our family's personal Garden of Eden. That is, before the fall. Ooh, we're going to stop there. Now I know you're coming back to find out what happened. I'm looking forward to that. All right, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.